that they may have life, and have it to the full. John chapter 10, verse 10. Jesus bequeathed us the message of the gospel so that we could conquer life in the Spirit, definitively freeing ourselves from the shackles of passions and enriching ourselves with divine virtues. The Master knew that his message throughout the centuries would be interpreted according to the whims of passions, contaminating it with human principles. That is why he said, "The Comforter whom the Father will send in my name, he will teach you all things and bring to your remembrance all that I have said to you." John chapter 14, verse 26. Spiritism has the mission of restoring the message of Christ that has been forgotten or misunderstood. Therefore, the spiritual benefactor, Emmanuel, says that the Spiritist doctrine is the living gospel. He dedicated himself to dictating the work, Paul and Stephen, so that we might know nascent epoch Christianity, where he preserved the essence of Jesus' message, and also learned from the first Christians the experience of the gospel in its interpretative purity. Participate in the online study of this work, and you will better understand how the Spiritist doctrine and the gospel of Jesus are perfectly combined by divine wisdom. Subscribe to the YouTube channel of the Minas Gerais Spiritist Union, UEM, and receive all the information. An initiative of the Area of Study of the Gospel of Jesus, AEJ, of the Minas Gerais Spiritist Federation Council, COFUNG, unifying Spiritist principles and contributing to moral transformation. Mamopa. State campaign, why study? Access www.emng.org. Participate and study. Realization, Area of Study of the Gospel of Jesus, AEJ. This is Social Communication Area, AC, SE. Minas Gerais Spiritist Union, Minas Gerais Spiritist Federation Council, FUNG. Good afternoon, dear friends. We are here to begin another study of this work, and I invite you all to join us in prayer.
Dear Jesus, gentle friend, Rabbi of Galilee, we ask you for blessings of inspiration, harmony, and peace for our minds and hearts, so that, Lord, we may achieve the conducive environment for the establishment of these spiritualizing values, mobilizing our wider lot, so that we may contribute our part to our renewal and the creation of a more fraternal and Christian world. So be it.
And Antonio, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon, Paulo. Thank God, everything is great. An excellent study to all of us, okay?
Thank you, Antonio. So continue with chapter 8. We will develop it in the search to extract the spiritual message that we are recording here in this book, which is the testimony of awakening the sleeping. We will see this here. Stephen's testimony begins to awaken except in relation to his serenity and harmony, perceiving this through his eyes. The personality of the Pharisees and scribes. We will examine the actions of the Pharisees at the moment of the stoning. Evil is the fruit of ignorance and selfishness, the basis for the construction of faith. because of Stephen's faith at that moment. We will doctrinally analyze some references surrounding the moment of disincarnation and the importance of the need for forgiveness. We always base our work on the initial passage from the Gospel. And we selected the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 7. This man came as a witness to testify concerning the light, so that all might grow in him. Jesus is saying that he came to give testimony, so that in this testimony he could present the light. Through the city of light is the truth, so that we could believe in his teachings through his examples. Why are we basing this work today on this verse, which could take us to analyze, but to show that Stephen's testimony begins to awaken something in him that he hadn't previously awakened. That. As we will also see at the end of the chapter, Abigail begins to reflect on Stephen's testimony and the importance of who Jesus is. Me, Jesus, and wife, mom, and wife, because of how much Stephen embraced Jesus' teachings, in those early afternoon hours. The Jerusalem sun was a blazing brazier. Nevertheless, the unbearable heat, the crowd moved with deep interest. This was the first process concerning the activities of the way. After the death of its founder, setting out from all the Jewish currents present there, in deference to the prestige of the law of Moses, the Pharisees made a great fuss about the event. Flanking the condemned man, they made a point of hurling the heaviest insults in his face. We will see in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 16, verses 6 and 12, in a passage where Jesus instructs us about the Pharisees. And Jesus said to them, "Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees." Then they understood that he did not say to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees. So Jesus warns us in the gospel so that we may guard ourselves against leaven, that is, that which produces right growth, the danger of the doctrine of the Pharisees. Doctrine means principles of truth. So it would be the principles of truth that the Pharisees built upon their moral vices due to their ignorance. And we will verify the importance of this in the Spirit's book in conclusion, item 9. Kardec states, "For a very long time, men have torn each other apart and anathematized one another in the name of a God of peace and mercy, offending him with such sacrilege on force. For a long time, however, there will still be some Pharisees who will deny him as they deny Christ." So we are going to see the importance in this aspect of the doctrine of the Pharisees, which Kardec still presents to today, that there are scribes and Pharisees who are still denying Jesus. Not because they are not Christians, because those who deny Jesus are not those who do not know him. Today, most people know Jesus, with the exception of those who are not Christian, but most spirits on earth know Jesus, both incarnate and disincarnate. But the issue is not those who deny Jesus, nor those who do not know him, but those who know him and do not adopt his principles in life, in their way of living. So we still have many Pharisees and scribes in the world. Even at certain moments, our bowel personalities identify with when we deny Jesus in our life and our principles. Stephen, however, although showing profound sadness, walked semi-serene, imperturbable. The meeting room of the synagogue was not far from the atrium of the Exav ceremony would take place. Only a few meters in the Tumandu walk ended precisely at the spot where the enormous altar of burnt offerings stood. At the far end of the spacious courtyard, vestibule was tied to a tree trunk so that the stoning could take place at the precise moment. The executioners would be representatives of the various synagogues in the city, since it was an honorable function assigned to those who were able to act in defense of Moses and his principles. Each synagogue had appointed its delegate at the beginning of the ceremony as head of the movement. Salvo received each person one by one alongside the victim, holding in his hands, according to pragmatic practice, that is, according to custom, the bright decorated robes to be worn. So we will see here in this part where Emmanuel recounts for us the moments preceding the stoning itself, the preparation, the ceremony surrounding it, the whole lot, including even the people who would stone the condemned. It was an honorable position, a function assigned to that person. And they were chosen people because to them, the Jews in each synagogue had the person best suited to defend the law, that is, Moses and his principles So we will see that all of Judaism revolved around a process not only of external worship, but a highly crystallized dogmatism due to a misguided understanding. It focused more on the means than on the ends and objectives. And the same thing happened to us in the history of Christianity. We became more attached to ritualism, a still forming phase of Judaism, which many of us probably went through, right? We became more attached to ritualism than excessively to the gospel. And today, as spiritists, we have to reflect a lot on this. Because if we are not focusing on external matters rather than what the practice of the spiritist movement brings us, forgetting the essence of the gospel of Jesus and our transformation, our renewal, which is the objective of the spiritist doctrine on earth, and to combine knowledge with practice to accelerate the evolutionary process of the planet. And we will find in the Book of Spirits, in the introduction, when Kardec says, "Let us therefore stop lending more importance to things of pure convention than they deserve and focus only on what is truly important." So we should reflect on this passage from the introduction, and both in terms of our doctrinal parentheses and our possere force. This will into a fussy blows. What are we giving importance to? Many times we spend too much time diverting our gaze, our life's objective, to things that are very external, that are not important. We cling to and adhere to many social conventions and effectively forget to look inward to work on our spiritual renewal, which is our spiritualization. Another order from young Tar Sensor. The execution began amidst laughter. Each executioner coldly aimed at their preferred point. General laughter followed each blow. Spare them their heads so that the spectacle does not lose its intensity and interest. Each expression of Judaism accompanied the executioner, indicated by the synagogue leaders, with shouts of death to the traitorous sorcerer, In question 101 of the Book of Spirits, we can perfectly express barbarity in that at the time of Stephen's stoning, the leading figures of Judaism were present. Let's say the intellectual elite of the Old Testament intellect. We had no shortage of knowledge, and we were surprised by the barbarity of the stoning of a man who was simply practicing good and love, simply because he did not profess the same faith as them. And we will understand this in question 101 of the Spirit's book, when Kardec addresses the spiritual scale, where he speaks of imperfect spirits, the predominance of matter over spirit, a propensity for evil, ignorance, pride, selfishness, and all the passions that follow from it. They have an intuition of God, but they do not understand him. Not all are essentially evil. Others, on the contrary, take pleasure in evil and rejoice when an opportunity arises to practice it. Intelligence may find in them allied wickedness and malice. That is to say, the issue is not one of knowledge, of the information. It is ignorance that information has not yet been sufficient to break the shell of pride and selfishness. Even when Kardec placed the predominating of matter over spirit, the spirit still very much linked to the physical senses due to ignorance of the physical aspect of me, zbon at zadid velo. But it was not absorbed. There was no comprehension, no understanding. And today it is no different. When we analyze after 2,000 years, we will find that many of us, understanding the truth and act largely out of ignorance, out of a lack of knowledge of the essence of truth. Truth. We do not, thank God, have barbaric attitudes, but verbal, mental, and sometimes if physical violence is still expressed in us. In some cases, Paul only understood this later, and in his letter to the Ephesians chapter 4 verse 18, he says, having been darkened, that is, darkened in their understanding, separated from the life of God by the ignorance that is in them, by the hardness of their hearts. In other words, they were there within a religion, but they weren't vibrationally connected to God. They weren't attuned to God through their feelings, their thoughts, because knowledge hadn't yet given meaning, hadn't promoted awakening, hadn't more or less removed from the crowd. Saul of Tarsus appreciated the satisfied and comfortable popular vibration. Then death of the preacher of Christ represented his first great triumph in winning the attention of Jerusalem and its prestigious political corporations finance. He was proud of the decision that had led him to pursue the path without consideration and without compromise. We see in Emmanuel's speech in this expression in the text that until that moment Paul was crystallized in his pride, which is the fruit of selfishness and personal interest. He was only concerned with his in his political career, more political than because within Judaism, as we have already said in past meetings, the religious, political, and economic aspects were all mixed together within what was called the religion of the Jews. So there was a lot of politics, which is the economic factor overshadowing the aspect of the divine message. That has happened and continues to happen today with Christianity, and many times in Christian religions, what economic and political aspects overshadow the message of Jesus. And we must be careful that this does not happen within the Spiritist movements. In chapter 5, item 4, of the gospel. According to Spiritism, we will find the explanation for this through weakness or indifference. They allowed the seeds of pride, selfishness, and foolish vanity to develop within them, producing a dry heart. Later, when they reap what they have sown, they are astonished and grieved by the lack of deference with which they are treated and by their ingratitude. This is what we see most in Spiritist works when people disincarnate. And at that moment of encounter, with their conscience, they realize all the evil they have done. Action susipan. So all that we are studying is to learn from these personalities and correct our divine conduct even in this present reincarnation. So that we do not adopt Bisariku conduct for our lives. God's mercy is infinite through revelation, and this objective, either according to Spiritist doctrine, the exchange between the two ones of life is mentate, an understanding to our lives so that we may learn to live and make fewer mistakes. That tranquility of Stephen, however, did not fail to impress him even in the depths of his willful, inflexible heart. Where could he find such serenity? Here Saul begins to reflect on this serenity, this harmony, this faith of Stephen. Beneath the white throne stones, those eyes face the tormentors without blinking, without revealing fear or disturbance. The martyr of the road felt supported by powerful and intangible forces. With each new blow, he felt the infinite sufferings that lashed his emaciated body intensify, but deep down he retained the impression of a sublime gentleness. In this supreme hour, he recalled the smallest bonds of faith that tied him to a higher life. Inwardly, he repeated Psalm 23 of David, as he had done before, the sister, in situations that seemed overcome. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And in the Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 19 and verse 11, we will see the question of faith. Hope and charity are corollaries that is resulting from faith and form. With it, an inseparable trinity, Bikchan E. Do not admit faith without proof. Blind is the daughter of blindness. Love God, but knowing why you love him. Believe in his promises, but knowing why you believe in them. And the text is long, and we invite everyone within these references that we are always presenting to read them more broadly, the entirety of the text, so that you will be able to grasp a broader understanding beyond what we are only excerpting and bringing to illustrate and core the text study. So we will see about reasoned faith, which the Spiritist doctrine, which Estevão already had as Abigail, in the following aspect. It is not simply because I am a Christian or that I am a Spiritist that I believe. Faith is something which is built gradually. And we are not only, it's not just in the field of reasoning. When we talk about reasoned faith, but it's a reasoning that has to transform us. We have to feel it. That's why in the book, Renunciation of the Dead, it says the message of Christ needs to be known, meditated on, felt, and lived in this sequence. So tapos niya, napagabiyabi, yip sana siya kababay wawating, arpadi kong loko siya, so sitate ko, nasa sekru. And in experience, we will see all the practical applicability of the truth. We will understand and practice how God shapes our lives, what our relationship with the Creator is like. When we reach that point, we consulted the understanding of the truth that we will no longer be afraid, we will no longer be terrified by any issue in life, because we feel the assertion of God in our lives, and we are certain that we are under the Creator's protection, and that difficult moments are educational moments for our soul, aiming at our spiritual growth. The body broke down in torment, but the spirit was calm and hopeful. Now he had the impression that two caressing hands were lightly passing over painful areas, providing him with a gentle sensation of relief. Without any fear, he realized that the sweat of agony had reached him. Dedicated friends from the spiritual plane surrounded the mayor in his supreme moments. In the matter in question 55 of the Spirit's book, we will see that the spirits clarify why, at that moment, he began to perceive and to feel the hands as mentioned here and now. He had the impression that two caressing hands were gently passing over the painful woman's eyes or legs. And in question 155, the spirits will say, the soul gradually detaches itself. The spirit releases itself little by little from the bonds that I have tied. These bonds untie themselves, but do not break. So at that moment, the detachment of the spiritual body from the physical body was already beginning. And at those points where the detachment was already occurring, the spirit begins to increase its sensitivity in the spiritual aspect. It begins to perceive much more than the five senses, the spiritual senses. That is why it was already perceiving the touch, right, of the hands of the spiritual benefactors who were welcoming it at that moment of disincarnation. The detachment, then question 55 continues, the detachment of the perispirit is not completed suddenly. It operates gradually with a slowness that varies greatly according to the individual. In some, it is quite fast. The moment of death is more or less that of liberation. In others, especially those whose entire life is material and sensual, the detachment is much less fast, not as lasting days, weeks, even months. This demonstrates to us that the process of detachment is directly related to our degree of spiritualization, that is, our degree of moralization. So in Estevo's case, the detachment was immediate because of his level of moral and spiritual development. At the height of his physical pain, as if he had crossed infinite abysses of perception, the young man from Corinth noticed that something had been torn open in his anxious soul. His eyes seemed to plunge into glorious scenes of another life. That is, that moment was already beginning, perceiving the spiritual plane, the legion of Jesus emissaries that lovingly surrounded him. The celestial court appeared to him. On the path of light unfolding before him, he recognized that someone was approaching, opening generous arms. And now on question 57. The spiritual saying, already partly detached from matter, the soul saw the future unfold before it and enjoys, in anticipation, a state of spirit. So due to the degree of spiritualization of this, that is, moralization and a rapid detachment, he was already taking possession, seizing the psychic potentialities, the faculties of the soul, which present the five senses. And this potential of the spirit, this psychic potential expands as we evolve. It is not only the fact that the spirit is disincarnated that it will take possession of its full potential at the potential. No, this is an achievement as we evolve. From the descriptions he had heard from Peter, he realized that he was contemplating the Master himself in all the splendor of his divine glories. Paul observed that the condemned man's eyes were fixed and radiant.
It was then that the Christian hero, moving his lips, exclaimed in a loud voice, "Behold, I see the heavens opened, and the resurrected Christ in the greatness of God." And then in Emmanuel, in the message, such a life, such a death, received in Pedro Leopoldo on June 21st, 1935, Emmanuel says, the impression of the soul at the moment of death varies with the states of consciousness of individuals. So that is, at that moment when Stephen perceives the presence of Jesus, the celestial spirits, Jesus' helpers, you come to welcome him, we will perfectly understand why this happened, not only because of what the spirit was, but already carried his value. We have been seeing this since the beginning of the study of this world, that we know that evolution does not happen in leaps, that it is a spirit that already carried many values, already had a certain spiritual ascension, but duly fulfilled his duty, his mission in his reincarnation. And he dedicated himself fully to good, to finish. So this broadened his state of consciousness. His whole life was dedicated to a spiritual life. So logically, due to affinity at that moment, his state of consciousness was of the higher planes, because every moment of his life, his activities, his work, was directed towards working for the designs of the higher spheres, promoting light, good, harmony, and charity on the physical level, renouncing himself. And later we will see in the book harmonization, problems of death. Emmanuel will also explain exactly this. Why Stephen, right, was under the tutelage of the celestial court and was received by Jesus. And we bring this to ourselves, constantly helping, watching over those who suffer, but supporting those who stray, extinguishing the darkness of ignorance, and soothing the wounds of our neighbor, constitutes an effort of renunciation that as to the higher plane inner. Stephen did this naturally because the spirit already had these achievements in the soul. Now, we need to exercise it. As I said, it is an effort of renunciation that elevates us to the high plane. So we still need to strive daily at every moment, because the act that Emmanuel seeks of constantly helping. Therefore, helping, watching over, supporting, extinguishing, soothing all of this in favor of a constant effort in our utmost a process of selflessness and renunciation, so that it builds our consciousness of good, so that we can renew and elevate ourselves, being born of good. And then in chapter 29, Thought and Life, entitled Death, Emmanuel tells us to die means to penetrate more deeply into the world of ourselves. That is, when we disincarnate, we will find the world we created within ourselves, the values we conquered, the values we incorporated. If we cultivated vices, we will find the world of vices around us. If we cultivated good love, justice, truth, humility, renunciation, and denial, we will find that world through the spiritual companions who are part of it, but here. And when we encounter the world within ourselves, we can experience these two extremes, the extremes. We can spend a long time deciphering our less happy reflections, metamorphosed into hallucinatory regions. resulting from our modernism, monotheism in the shadows, that is, from the vices we cultivate, or simply transferring ourselves from one plane to another. That is, from the physical plane to the spiritual plane, because we already lived on the spiritual plane when we were incarnated. Improving the climate of our reflections adjusted to good, that is, supporting our psychic potentialities, advancing in consequent steps towards the horizons of ascension and light, because this was already our reality, our more wonderful reality. Two young women approached the pursuer in intimate gestures. Dolly handed Abigail over to her brother. Though somewhat perplexed and moved, he said that Estevão's indomitable courage had led him to consider the unknown tranquility that must reign in the spirit of Mars. Abigail, noticing the victim's miserable situation, could contain a cry of astonishment. What man was that bound to the torture rack? That heaving chest soaked in blood, that hair, that pale face, disfigured by the overgrown beard, could it be her? Can't it be her brother? How can one speak of the immense anxieties and the unexpected surprise of a single moment? Abigail trembled. The girl seemed to see nothing but the condemned man destined to bleed to death in martyrdom. She remembered now, as she left the dungeon after her father's death, it was herself who had left Jaziel in the position of the executioner. The executor racked the merciless shackles and the poor man on his knees. She had impulses to throw herself in front of them, to clarify the situation, to know the identity of that man. Stephen, seeing that Jesus contemplated the figure of Dr. Tarsus melancholically, as if lamenting his condemnable deviations, the disciple of Simon experienced, through the shame, sincere friendship in his heart. He knew Christ in that salvo. Filled with genuine brotherhood and wanting to defend the persecutor, he exclaimed impressively, Lord, do not hold this sin against him. And Emmanuel, tolerance, he will clarify for us, give us an idea of why Steve able to feel this for Saul. Tolerance, however, is not a superficial concept. It is a living reflection of the understanding that is born and cleansed in hope, patience, and forgiveness, with forgetting evil. To forgive is to listen, that is, to forget the shadow, seeking the light. So many times when we talk about tolerance, we don't get that feeling that tolerance is something we have to endure, right? Tolerance comes to explain to us that it is a reflection. That is, it is a consequence of a felt understanding that is born clearly within our soul due to the understanding of why something happened. It has to have a logical explanation for us so that we truly understand that. Therefore, understanding will generate tolerance, and this will automatically bring about hope and patience, and will help forgiveness to spring forth within us, leading to the forgetting of all evil, because true forgiveness occurs when we forget the evil. What is forgetting the evil? Because when we remember it, it won't bother us, it won't move us inwardly in the direction of some contrary feeling, trying. It won't bother us. That is forgetting the evil. So forgiving is a movement within the soul, seeking the light to forget the shadow. And in the Reformador magazine, in the message from Emmanuel Jesus and the forgiveness from March 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, 1959, Page 168, Emmanuel tells us, forgiving those who offend us will not, therefore, be to share their shadow, but rather to forget their blows and move forward, working and learning, always helping and serving in the exaltation of good, so that the world within us may be freed from evil. So now, Emmanuel, what does it mean to forgive, or rather, what does it mean to excuse? It's not agreeing with evil, no. We know that we cannot agree, we shouldn't agree with evil, but to forget what they did against us. And move on, not to remain trapped in what Emmanuel himself, in another message, just says, he who does not forgive does not advance, that is, he remains shackled within himself, he remains orbiting around that feeling, he does not progress, right? So we have to move forward, right? Forward, in what sense? Working, learning, helping, serving, because this is the mechanism that will help us forgive and forget this evil. Because working for good transforms us in the application of good. We come to understand our fellow man, why he did what he did, which is the fruit of his ignorance, so that we may free ourselves from this evil. Because if we crystallize this evil, it is this evil that we will find when we disincarnate. Estevão saw the figure of his sister dressed as in the days of judgment in her father's house. It was his beloved little sister. How could he explain her presence? Perhaps she too had been taken to the master's kingdom and was returned with him in spirit to welcome him to a better world. He wanted to proclaim his infinite joy, but his throat could no longer utter a word. Emotion had overwhelmed him in the final hour. He felt the master of Nazareth crossing his brow when the last zone had opened, a flap of blood. He heard distant Argentinian voices singing hymns of love about the glorious themes of the Sermon on the Mount. Unable to endure the torment any longer, the disciple of the gospel felt himself weakening. And at that moment, we remember the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 3, when Jesus says, "And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am, that it be." So when Jesus said, "When I go and prepare a place for you," he is not referring to preparing a place for us on the other side. And he needed to go so that we could prepare the place, to prepare the conditions for our spiritual redemption. So he said that he needed to return to the spiritual plane to prepare circumstances to leave redemptive opportunities through the testimony of each disciple, so that he could come again and take us to where he was. So that even today this message of Jesus echoes in our souls, in our psychic ears. Because each reincarnation that he provides us with through circumstances is for our moral testimonies educated for our souls, for us to witness the learning of truth, that to erase the vices of guilt from our consciences, so that we can gradually return and go to his company. Abigail, listening to the condemned man's expressions and receiving his blazing and clear gaze, could not conceal her anguished surprise. "Oh, Saul! Saul is my brother!" she exclaimed, terrified. "Saul, what are you saying?" She stammered softly, widening her eyes. "It can't be. You're going crazy." "Abigail, no, it's not him, it's him," he repeated, his face turning extremely pale. And XAVIER, he insisted, astonished. Grant me a minute. Let me speak with Mundo for just a minute. Saul said, impossible, replied the reluctant young man. Abigail, Saul, by the law of Moses, by the love of our fathers, listen, he exclaimed, wringing his hands. Saul didn't believe such a coincidence was possible. Besides, there was a difference in the name. It was necessary to clarify this point before anything else. Certainly. Abigail's false impression would be dispelled by the first direct contact with the dying man. Combining these reflections for a second, the bride spoke sternly, I will go with you to identify the dying man, but until we can, keep quiet about your impressions. Will called the high-ranking official curtly and said, have the corpse taken to the priest's chamber. The order was carried out without further delay. Will ordered several amphorae of delicious wine to be served to his friends and admirers to celebrate his first triumph. Without the burden apprehensive, he crept almost stealthily to the room reserved for the priests of Jerusalem, accompanied by his fiancée. He gently led Abigail by the arm, but did not speak to her. Cry silenced them. What if Stephen was indeed the key seal they had awaited with such anxiety? Absorbed in anguished reflections, they entered the solitary chamber. The young doctor ordered the assistants to withdraw and carefully closed the door. Abigail approached her bloodied brother with infinite tenderness, and as if called to life by a powerful and invincible force, both noticed that the victim was moving his bloody head, evidencing the painful effort of his final agony. Stephen, that voice was almost a whisper, but his gaze was calm, clear. Hearing her hesitant and drawn-out expression, young Tartan recoiled in astonishment. What did it all mean? He couldn't doubt it. The victim of his relentless pursuit was the beloved brother of the woman he had chosen. What mechanism of fate had concocted such a situation that would embitter him for the rest of his life? Where was God, who had not inspired him in a labyrinth of circumstances that led him to this irremediable outcome? He felt possessed by boundless sorrow. Otone, he who had chosen Abigail as the guardian angel of his existence, would have been forced to renounce that love forever. Manly pride would not allow him to defile the brother of his supposed enemy, confessed and judged as a vile criminal kamanasi. So we are going to the second part of the second module to finish just chapter 8 on Genuetoni for Verbinje. So we made a division at this point in the chapter to give more meaning to the third module so that we can now focus on the moments of dialogue between Abigail and Estevão. We will reflect on this final aspect of the spiritual message that we brief at the beginning. We saw that at this moment the awakening of Saul begins, and who had been asleep due to his pride, his passions, his selfishness, his personal interests, overshadowing the truth that he already possessed. Then Stephen's testimony begins to awaken in our life. Testimony, however simple it may be, contributes to the awakening of those around We saw the personality of the Pharisees, the scribes. Although the text speaks specifically of the Pharisees, how much we should reflect on the moments when we act like Pharisees in our lives. How much we, due to a lack of understanding of Jesus' teachings, act a wrong. We see in the text that the evil they were doing to Stephen stemmed from ignorance. That is, the lack of understanding of the truth and allowing selfishness to prevail in their lives. The foundation for building faith, the importance of understanding the good truth and applying that understanding to our relationships with others so that we can understand why they act as we do and why act in certain ways at certain times. Transgressing divine laws, straying from the higher designs of life. We briefly reflect on the moment of disincarnation and a group point made in Pisarin is when Emmanuel speaks about the world we find ourselves in. When it is the world we build within ourselves. That message which we invite everyone to read, the message shown in the book. Thought in life shows the need for forgiveness so that we can move forward, walk in our lives, leaving behind all the feelings that still shackle us and hinder our ascension. Much peace to all. Latino, it's over to you, my brother.
Paulo, dear friends who are watching us this afternoon, we want to invite you to say our final prayer. At this moment of reflection, part of the work touches our hearts deeply, and we pray to ruling on the left that he envelops us, sensitizes our souls, illuminates our understanding, so that we may find the resources to propel our will towards contributing to Christian example. Not only but in the daily routine of our lives. Lord, we thank you for the access you grant us to the instructions that your mercy gives us the opportunity to reach us, envelop all of our humanity, Lord, in the vibrations of your love. May these examples of the first Christians resonate deeply in our souls and inspire us to contribute our part in creating spiritual environments and a more fraternal, more understanding world full of tolerance and comprehension. And may these resources, Lord, be the commitment of each one of us. So be it.
Jesus said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." This revelation teaches us that only through knowledge of the truth will we achieve true happiness. The Master also affirmed, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." In this statement, Jesus defines that his gospel contains all the truth we need to know and practice as the only path to achieving spiritual life. The Spiritist doctrine comes with the mission of explaining Jesus' teaching so that extract the truth contained in the gospel text. Jesus is the gateway to human redemption, and Kardec is the interpretative key to decoding the gospel texts, which contain the divine laws to promote the liberation of humanity. To this end, we need to study Spiritist doctrine and the gospel of Jesus in an interdependent manner, learning to correlate the principles existing in both divine revelations in nominus. The statewide campaign for studying is an invitation to Spiritists to dedicate themselves to serious study characterized by its continuity with the objective of penetrating the divine essence that liberates and elevates humankind to God. This campaign is an initiative of the Spiritist Federation Council of Minas Gerais, a federative body of the Minas Gerais Spiritist Union to unify Spiritist principles and contribute to the moral transformation of those who desire it. Learn more about the FORÇA campaign through Spiritist Centers, the Municipal Spiritist Alliance, and the Regional Spiritist Council, and access the material on the website www.uemg.org.br. Participate and study.